David McDonald, the CEO of SolarAfrica, joins us for another episode of What's Next. And we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. When I first saw it, I thought, well, listen, what on earth has wheeling got to do with solar? Because automatically when you talk about wheeling, you think, well, it's got to do something with cars, right? But wheeling is set to transform South Africa's power landscape. Businesses can now buy power directly from independent power producers, which are IPPs, like SolarAfrica, for example, thanks to virtual wheeling. And IPPs can now sell power to multiple off-takers, one-to-many versus the one-to-one traditional wheeling arrangements. Well, if it sounds complicated, that's why we've got the expert in to tell us all about it, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you back. David, how have you been?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Aki. Been keeping well. We're very busy. Market's changing every day, but really good space to be in.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. Well, let's start off with the basics. Some of our audience members have heard about wheeling. I must be honest, I heard about it for the first time until recently, where independent power producers like SolarAfrica yourselves can generate power on one side of the country and sell it to an off-taker on the other side of the country. But there's a bit more to it than that, right? Can you explain to us what wheeling entails? What on earth is it all about?
Sure. Essentially, as you mentioned, it's a off-site solar solution. That's kind of built in high radiance areas. Typically, the Northern Cape has been traditionally where majority of the solar farms have been established. But it's a mechanism that allows businesses access to cheap power without physically having a solar system on site, right? SolarAfrica particularly are building a site in the Northern Cape. And this energy that we put onto the Eskom networks will be generated from this farm and then will be able to be sold to multiple business users throughout the country. I think very notable is that it is at a highly discounted rate to the current utility prices, which is the main driver and for adoption of wheeling. And essentially it's based on a credit system on your bill. And we can get into how that works later on. But at this stage, it's mainly focused on kind of business to business transactions, and it's not available for the residential market. But in time to come, if we look at the European markets, it's definitely something that's going to liberalize the market and give access to cheaper, greener energy to all consumers.
Okay.
I think traditionally, wheeling was only for your larger consumers. The examples of your larger mines, your petrochemical companies. And those transactions were done, as you mentioned, on a one-to-one basis, where we were getting to financial close purely off the back of the balance sheet of those off-takers. Now with virtual wheeling and the change in the regulations in the landscape, we are allowed to sell from one particular plant to many customers, which now allows us access to a diverse off-take or base of off-takers. It reduces the system size of these customers and the potential consumption. And particularly now we're starting to focus on the commercial industrial space, your manufacturers, etc. And that's kind of been the shift from traditional wheeling to virtual wheeling is the one-to-many factor.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. So I assume that, let's say I've got a factory in KZN, for example, and I'm doing some power and wheeling from one of your plants in the Northern Cape that's generating power. I assume that you're going to use the existing infrastructure that's there to get the power to me, right, from Eskom, right? So essentially you're paying a fee to Eskom to use their kind of network, and the power that comes into my business from you guys, I get billed directly from you. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah, essentially. We definitely using the existing infrastructure. So we have grid allocation from Eskom. We connect our solar system onto their network. Essentially, we get a credit as we put the kilowatt hour onto the network, and then we make sure that credit gets allocated against your bill. Right? So if you, for example, buy 1 million kilowatt hours from us, you'll make sure that million kilowatt hours are credited against your bill, and then you'll get a separate bill from us, obviously at a discounted rate to Eskom tariffs.
So how will my factory know that the power is coming from SolarAfrica or it's coming from Eskom?
So you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? So typically, you get a bill from Eskom at the end of the month, and they tell you how much you've used. You don't know if that comes from Kusile or if it comes from a hydro station. You don't know where it actually comes from at this stage, and you'll be in a similar position, right?
Yes.
The only difference is you will see a credit on your bill, which we have then integrated with Eskom to say allocate X amount of credits to customer Y.
Okay.
And then you get a bill from us for the same amount of credits.
Okay, perfect. So essentially you're competing with Eskom on rates here, and you're both providing the same product, but you're competing against rates, which is brilliant. Now, you mentioned earlier that, in the past, you'd have the heavy duty guys like in the energy sector and mines that would utilize it. But what type of businesses should consider wheeling?
So right now it's governed by the wheeling regulations, which stipulate that you need to be a customer connected to medium voltage connections. All right, so that's kind of your 11,000 volts or 11 kV upwards. And typically we see those customers being your commercial industrial customers, everything kind of above, let's call it a 500 kVA or 500 kilowatt system. It's generally people who are connected to medium voltage. Examples of those, your larger examples of those are your data centers. And why it works for them is kind of they're very limited with roof space, but they have massive power consumption. So wheeling is a good offering from them. Your packaging and manufacturing sectors, where operational costs have a big impact on the business, and they're looking to reduce those through cheaper electricity needs. Something like the automotive industry, your OEMs and your tier 1 to 3 suppliers who are under pressure from international sustainability requirements, and they're kind of looking more for green credits than and potentially a saving that impacts their business. And then your traditional guys like your mining, where the environment is not necessarily conducive to on-site solar. So in general, it's everything from a small retail center all the way up to a large power consumer.
Wow, I mean, it's just a win-win for everyone, right? Because you're helping Eskom, you're taking strain off the grid, and you're offering cheaper power to organizations, but you're actually helping Eskom along the way, and I guess it's brilliant. And for companies, the biggest benefit, what would it be of wheeling apart from? Well, the immediate one that comes to mind is that I'm going to be paying less for electricity. What are the biggest benefits?
Yeah, look, I think so. I mean, we've all have this aspiration to transform the world and get to net zero, but ultimately, that's driven by commercial decisions, which is obviously your savings, right? So, as I've mentioned, the largest driver is heavily reduced tariffs, and we're seeing tariffs up to 50% cheaper than your current utility rates. Which is a massive saving. Other benefits are, as I mentioned, for typical customers who can't get access to solar because of their specific on-site requirements, small roof space, dusty areas, for example, cement factories, brick yards, that kind of thing. You now have access to this cheaper, greener electricity without having to fork out money up front for a large system to provide land or to procure additional land. Another driver is the contract flexibility. So we've recently just concluded a portfolio deal contract. So with a company with many sites across the country under one contract. Those contracts are flexible on tenor, so we can sign everything from 10 to 25 years. And they can move assets or move properties in and out of this contract. So, versus your traditional on-site solar where you're locked in for a really long time. Here, essentially, it's like buying data.
Yes.
If you move from one to the next, you can transfer your data contract. And that's kind of, typically how it works.
All right. I mean,
your more softer benefits that's available essentially immediately. There's no interruption to your operations, those kind of small things.
Yeah. And I assume For example, businesses that work at night, are you able to store the energy and still sell it even when the sun is down, for example? Or is it just, daytime operating hours where
At this stage, typically it would be daytime. It's done on a time of use credit system. So
okay.
where we generate in peak periods, we're able to sell it in peak periods. But we definitely see that being a future product. Based on our tariff structure in South Africa, we have really high peak rates, and obviously that to try and manage load and help Eskom with the curtailment as well. So we definitely see in future us having large storage on site, increasing our capacity, putting that into batteries, whatever form of battery they may be at that time, and then selling that off as the market requires.
That's brilliant. So if a business is watching this right now and they're saying, listen, this is it, it gives us that flexibility of getting energy. It makes financial sense. How can a business get wheeling as we speak right now? What do they do?
So essentially, you can reach out to an IPP similar to SolarAfrica. Essentially you'll be signing a long-term offtake. So as I mentioned, anything from 10 to 25 years, and those contracts are virtual power purchase agreements. And that will secure your wheeling portion of SolarAfrica's grid allocation. Okay. Eskom has recently changed the rules around how they allocate, and we can get into that. But essentially, you need to be ready, and those IPPs who have allocation, it is very scarce at this stage, right? So we are signing up virtual power purchase agreements prior to the solar plants coming online, and then essentially those agreements are sized off of your consumption. So we calculate your average predicted consumption, on a time of use basis, peak off peak standard. And we structure our custom VPPAs to allow you to commit to a set amount of wheeled power per month.
Okay.
Obviously, the seasonal, certain customers are seasonal, and there is a level of commitment from a customer that needs to obviously allow us to make these projects bankable. But that VPPA can scale with your business. As I mentioned, like, for example, on a portfolio deal, we can move assets in and out. We can increase those facility sizes, etc.
Okay. That makes great sense. Now, SolarAfrica is one of a handful of IPPs, as you said so a second ago, that are allowed to wheel power to off-takers. Now, a big part of this is getting your share of the current grid allocation, which you've done. Apart from now having the ability to push power into the grid, why is grid allocation so significant in the bigger scheme of things?
Like with most things in South Africa, I think there's been a lack of investment into infrastructure across the board. And now we see that in the electricity space. So whilst our transmission and distribution lines are world class, we just don't have enough of them in high irradiance areas, right? So at this stage, we are building solar farms where it makes most commercial sense, where land is cheap, the sun is a lot, and similar to on the wind side, that's a little bit more specific to actually where the wind blows, right? And we might not necessarily have those transmission lines in place to evacuate the energy from there to where it is being consumed in your high dense areas where the land is expensive and your yields are low, right? Or your sun yield is low. So getting access to those transmission lines in those areas is extremely scarce. And the importance of Eskom actually giving out this grid allocation is them acknowledging that they need to be partnering with private entities such as the IPPs to be able to generate more power to actually service their customers. It's been a 2-year journey for us. Eskom and NERSA have changed the rules along the way. And this was born out of the REAP space, so your large utility solar and wind projects, with Eskom offtake. They were quite prescriptive in their process. And we had IPPs who had essentially had a share of allocation, but never had customers and never had a bankable project. Right?
Yeah.
So we had heavy grid constraint. They've now changed those rules, which means you have to have a customer and your project must be ready. And as I mentioned, this has been a 2-year journey for us to be able to get this allocation. The processes are extremely stringent. And essentially the only way we've got our allocation is we've had to build infrastructure for Eskom. So we're building what is called an MTS, which is a main transmission substation. And we're investing heavily into this substation, which after commissioning or after operations, we actually hand over to Eskom. So they're getting infrastructure off the back of this, which is allowing us access to their network, which is allowing us to put the energy onto the lines, which then we're able to sell off to our customers. So extremely important moment in time that they're allowing IPPs to come in and invest into their infrastructure and giving them access, and obviously allows us to sell that power on through to their customers at a reduced rate.
And that must be quite a big investment for you guys, eh?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know necessarily throw the numbers around.
No, sure,
but it adds significant cost to projects. But it is. I think it still allows us to bring on power at 50% cheaper than what Eskom's currently selling power at. So,
wow.
Even though it is a significant investment, it is still definitely worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah. So do you have an idea of what percentage of the grid the IPPs will eventually provide? Has that been set up or defined by NERSA or Eskom, for example, that IPPs will ultimately supply 10% or 20%, or is there no limit?
No, there's definitely a limit. So there's an integrated resource plan that kind of gets revisited every couple of years. But as technology changes, as more energy storage comes online, as markets develop, that IRP plan needs to be amended as well.
Okay.
So at this stage of hand, I'm not too sure what the cap will be. But essentially, we have a shortfall of energy in South Africa. We have coal assets that need to be taken out of operation in the coming years, and those stats are definitely available. And they need to be replaced with other generating assets. And at this stage, the market wants renewable assets. They want cheaper power, and kind of the only way for South Africa to achieve that, and essentially, if you look across the globe, is through private partnerships and IPPs.
That makes sense.
Model all over.
And I mean, this is important for Eskom to partner with the private sector like yourselves when it comes to power generation project. I mean, the big question is why, but you've answered many of those questions. The problem is that there's a shortfall; they're not producing enough power. Are there any other reasons why Eskom why it's important for Eskom to partner for power generation? And another reason you just stated now is that a lot of the traditional ways we generate power are getting old, right?
Yeah. So Eskom haven't got the greatest track record with control on their budget and their spend, and particularly on these large infrastructure projects. I think that is a fundamental change in what's happening in the market. You've got investors who aren't necessarily willing to give Eskom money to increase the transmission infrastructure, to increase new generating assets. So if they don't partner with the private sector, we are never going to cover this energy gap, which has tremendous knock on with the economy, and from there it's kind of downhill. But essentially, through partnering with private sector on commercially bankable projects, they're getting infrastructure through these main transmission networks. To give you another example, we've got a number of other projects around South Africa, and to be able to get access to that grid, we've got to upgrade transmission line. Yeah. So essentially, the private sector is coming in and doing work that Eskom should have done many years ago, or potentially was on their roadmap. They just don't necessarily have the funds or the ability to actually roll that out. So that's kind of, for me, the main advantage there. I think, the softer side of things, it builds trust. It's good for investor confidence into the country. We're moving away from a monopolized energy market. We're liberalizing that energy market. Brings price tension. We're promoting renewable energy. We're able to comply with, international net zero targets. It's minimizing disruptions. However, there is myth saying that if we put too much solar, we put too much wind onto the grid, we could also create a collapse. But that's why this integrated resource plan is so important for Eskom. And Eskom's job here is actually to manage that grid and to manage those resources and to balance it, right? You're never going to get away with one technology providing power to the entire country, and having a mix of wind and solar and hydro and gas and whatever it may be is what Eskom needs to be focusing on, and allow those private entities to build that generation, and then they will monetize the wires that the country owns. Right? I think if they can focus on that, they'll get back to a profitable standpoint, and then from there, through investor confidence, we're able to build out more transmission lines, which allows IPPs more access to the grid, and we can bring on more power, which obviously more power means growth, which means the economy is in a better state, bring on our more manufacturers, decreased unemployment rates, et cetera, et cetera.
Very interesting. So SolarAfrica will wheel power into the grid from your utility. These scale solar farms that have got thousands, hundreds of thousands, I imagine, of solar panels. Tell us more about it and what the road ahead looks like for your company.
So we've got a number of projects across the country, and they're in different stages of their development. But if you're talking about branch project, it's called Sun Central. It's based in the Northern Cape. This is the one where we've just got grid allocation from Eskom on. It is a gigawatt facility, so that's 1,000 megawatts. And essentially phase one, which is what we've secured the capacity for, is a 300 megawatt solar facility. There's an additional 2 phases to come post that. But essentially, just to give you an idea of scale, that 300 megawatts is made up of about 560,000 solar panels. So it is a vast installation. And kind of where we are in that process is we've ordered all our orders have been placed for the long lead time items. So that's those massive transformers that form part of that substation that we're building on behalf of Eskom. So those have all been ordered. Construction on site will start in January of 2024, so in the next 2 months. And essentially, we're looking to bring that power on, hopefully by the end of Q1, beginning of Q2 in 2025. And hence why I said, because we've got that grid allocation, we have signed up customers already. There's very limited space within that first phase of what we've got left to sell to the market. So we're already out in the market selling phase 2 and phase 3. And then, again, as I mentioned, we've got projects all over the country that we're kind of pre-selling. And because that's Eskom's now process, you must come with a customer. So for customers who are saying, well, why do I need to sign up today if I'm only getting power in 2025? That doesn't make sense. The real problem is if you don't sign up today, come 2025, you're not going to be able to get power from anybody in the market because grid allocation is so scarce. And because we've got to put so much time, effort, money, and resources into building the infrastructure that allows us access to this grid. All right? Yes. So if you don't move today, then you are definitely going to be behind the market. You're not going to get access to that 50% cheaper, greener energy. And if your competitors are doing it and you're not doing it, that's a significant saving that you're missing out on.
Gee, that's amazing. And just to, David, come back to the companies that should be looking at it. If a company measures itself on how many megawatts they use, at what stage, how many megawatts of power that I would use would make it sense to move to looking at a product like yours?
I think some of our smaller customers, for example, we've got a fully fledged behind the meter business or a rooftop solar business, if you want to call it that. And a lot of our customers on the rooftop side are signing up for wheeling as well. So the fact that you got solar on site doesn't necessarily discount the fact that you can also get wheeling. You can top with wheeling, right? So anything from like a 500 kilowatt peak user and above is generally what would qualify today. There are discussions, and they are piloting a virtual wheeling platform that will allow aggregation of low voltage connections, and that could be anything from a really small shopping center, a office park, or whatever it may be. There are administrative costs to wheeling, so you've got to have some form of scale there. But in those aggregation platforms, LV wheeling will be something of the future. But I think for now, it is your medium voltage customers, so anything from 500 kilowatts upwards, generally, are what should be trying to pick up majority of the market share at this stage.
Absolutely fascinating. David, I've really enjoyed our conversation. David McDonald, the CEO of SolarAfrica, talking to us about wheeling and how important it is and the benefit it's going to add to the economy. I mean, these guys are investing millions and millions of rands into infrastructure, and it's all going back into the grid and hopefully making the economy benefit from these actions. Thank you so much for your time, David.
Perfect. Thanks for the opportunity, Aki.